You're listening to an audio recording from the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia.
Hello everybody. Welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting here today, the Ngunnawal people. And I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. First of all, it's an honor to have you here at the National Film and Sound Archive. And it's an honor to be the host of this event. Thank you, Director Richard Lowenstein and editor over there, Taylor Martin. Thanks for coming. They are our special guests tonight. And my colleague Sam will do a Q&A after the film with them. So please be seated after the film because it continues. We are the NFSA. We are the national agency that is concerned with the audiovisual heritage of this country. With a collection of over 3 million items, films, documentaries, television, radio, broadcast, objects, documents and artifacts, but also new media like video games and web video, virtual reality material, because that's also part of our media history, or will be part of the future audiovisual heritage of this country. So it's worth collecting and preserving that material as well. It's our role, what I said, it's our role to safeguard the media history of Australia. And actually what we do is we keep memories alive. Which is what we are celebrating tonight, keeping memories alive. Mystify is in many ways related to our heritage. The NFSA was instrumental in providing archival footage and audio recordings, including recent digitization of INXS's 2-inch master tapes that helped, for example, achieve superior audio quality within the production of this film. But there are more connections with the archive. The NFSA preserves a large selection of INXS and Michael Hutchins materials from the film Dogs in Space, also directed by Richard, and we had a nice Q&A event 2 years ago here at this place about that film. But we also hold the master materials, for example, for Michael Hutchins' collaboration project called Max Q with Ollie Olsen, who, for example, is also on the soundtrack of Dogs in Space. INXS is also part of our Sounds of Australia registry of sound and music recordings that have helped shape Australian culture and identity. Richard Lowenstein has directed countless music videos for INXS, U2, Crowded House, Cold Chisel, and many other Australian greats, and they're also preserved here in our collection. Mystify, actually a rock and roll archive production, and yes, an archive can be sexy, is a perfect example of how the NFSA collection is reused by contemporary filmmakers. We collect and preserve audiovisual heritage, but it's essential that we also share it, that it inspire new works, that the material is reused and reimagined. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the film, enjoy the evening, and can I please ask Richard to say a few words? Thank you.
Yes, thank you all for coming. It's a film, Mystify is a film that has very strong connections with the NFSA, and it's going to have even stronger ones once I deposit all our archive that we have in the making of this back with them. And it's because it's incredibly important to me that this material doesn't just lie in someone's garage, namely my garage, and that it actually gets treated with respect, and it's kind of one of the major reasons why we made the film, not just to put the story of Michael straight, but also to actually show some of this material, sound and audio in its sort of former glory, because the 80s was a very strange time where people started shooting on all different formats and stopped shooting on film, and basically PAL video really wasn't up to archivally up to scratch. And so you get better actual quality archive from the 60s and 70s than you do from the 80s. So it was kind of a nerdy archival project for me as well. But we'll talk more about that after with the Q&A, and enjoy the film, and thanks for all coming again. Thank you.
Thank you all for staying back. This is great. Great to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could we get the lights down just a tad, please, Jed? That'd be great. My name's Sam Digno. I'm a creative producer here at the National Film and Sound Archive, and we are really thrilled tonight to have both Richard Lowenstein and Taylor Martin, the film's editor, here to join us in Q&A. As Jan was saying earlier, we're really proud at the NFSA to have been able to contribute to this production through some of the archival holdings that we have in the collection. You spent so many years working with and getting to know Michael and the greater band as well. What was it like telling this story as both a filmmaker and a friend, sort of navigating that line and the nuances between being objective but also really close to the subject?
Yes, I mean, that was one of the dangers of making it a sort of a eulogy to a friend and a love fest, rather than trying to be objective and stand back from the story. And of course, that's the role I wanted to play, is to stand back and not sort of be overcome with my own prejudices. So there was a hell of a lot of much more than I normally do, opening the film out to other people, to like test screenings, and even as I'd do a sequence, I would sort of send it off to a few people that I trusted that were objective and say, well, what do you think? I'm sort of tried to be incredibly self-critical and saying, I do want this to work, especially to people who didn't know. There's incredible... It was very obvious to me that there was, 20s and 30-year-olds didn't have any idea who Michael Hutchins was. I mean, some in Australia, but overseas as I travelled, it was like no idea. You'd have to be in a taxi and sing them an INXS song to go, oh yeah, that guy. So I did want it to work on a completely objective level of a story of an unknown rock star, as well as a record of who he actually was from an intimate perspective. So, yeah, I sort of, it's one of the reasons I ended up, because I was interviewed for the film as well, and one of the reasons I ended up removing my own, and my editors had no problem removing my own, my own interview from the film, because it would have made it even more or less objective and more subjective. And yeah, so I did do my best. I still look at it even now and sort of go, I could have done better. But
I think that's pretty universal, and not necessarily something to dwell on for yourself.
Yes.
It's one of the things that kind of stands out about the film is the choice to use almost all entirely archival footage and audio recordings. What sort of drove that decision? I mean, I guess the really interesting thing is the fact that these audio recordings really tell the narrative in a way that doesn't get in the way of the story or sort of affect. It takes you back to a time and place.
Well, I had done previous few documentaries. One, Autoluminescent, which was the story of Roland S. Howard, who was a guitarist, and another one, Echo Homo, and they'd both been more conventional in their talking head approach. And this one, even as we started filming, which was about 10 years before we actually finished the production, so 2009, we started actually filming talking heads. Like, I think Bono was the first interviewee, and
in Melbourne around like 2010 kind of thing.
As he toured that in that year, and then INXS, the reformed INXS with a new lead singer, was passing through, so I grabbed all them and sat them down in front of my camera, and so I really didn't have a clear image at that stage of how the end result was. And then as we put together the pitch trailer, I I started this technique of just using the audio interviews and using footage of Michael that had been scanned and everything. And so by that stage, which was now about 2016, I decided that I didn't want talking heads for a couple of reasons. One very prosaic one, which was the films can only be 110 minutes maximum long, and my producer John Batzik wanted it like 85 minutes long, but he's English, so they always had a thing about NXS. But in that, and we had so much material, including radio recordings that were coming in, and voice of Michael telling his own story, and some of the interviews. And the literally the screen time they would take up on screen became redundant. So it's like I wanted to use as much imagery of Michael as possible in those times where people were talking. I didn't want to sort of cut to a talking head which was shot 2 years ago and
kind of so thankful that Michael had that approach to cameras so early in life, all the way through, and was always filming, always recording something.
Filming and also interacting with behind the scenes cameras, and sort of. So I just didn't want you to be looking at the people and saying, oh, they've had a bit of face work, or they're not looking too good, or they are looking good, or and especially not the INXS manager. I didn't want anyone looking at him, and so it was very much on top of that is the use the screen time, but also the big immersive reason was I wanted to take you back in time. And if you think about the nature of a talking head, is you're pulling the audience to the present day when the talking head was filmed. And then the person talks, and then they say, oh, then he did this, and then he did that, or then he was so young and shy, and then you go back. And then they own that narrative. The person talking owns the narrative, where I didn't want them to own. I wanted to take the audience back in time and grow up with Michael, or go through those years with Michael. So, I just didn't want anything contemporary in the film. And voices tend not to age. So even though the voices are interviewed like last year or whatever, they haven't really changed that much from, so you can imagine them talking as if they were there back in the day.
And so many, are so iconic, the voices in the film as well. You can really pick them out without even the little titles on the screen and things. They really stand
and I think your mind fills in, like especially the Martha Traup, the New York sort of personal manager, who's got this great sort of Brooklyn Jewish voice, and your sort of mind fills in the gaps rather than seeing her, sitting in a recording studio or whatever, the generic sort of setting is. And so we ended up. There's another reason on top of that is that when you actually have an audio microphone in a dark room, usually in a recording studio or just in a hotel room, that's what I do. I travel the world and set up a recording studio microphone, and the people would come into the rooms and sit there, and there's no film crew. There's just you, them, and a microphone, which they very quickly forget about. And they're not dressed up, they're not in their Sunday best with makeup or whatever. And they just forget, and they start talking like a friend, and they start talking in a very intimate way, which they never would if there was 3 people in a room and a light shining in their face. And I got some very, especially the Kylie interview, I only got the frankness of that Kylie interview because she was just sitting in a room, we knew each other, and she started talking to someone she felt safe with. Yeah. And she didn't have to worry about did she look good or whatever,
That's a really interesting thing with access with these sorts of documentaries, especially around a subject like Michael, when, that intimate, very individual experience of a person and a relationship with them needs to shine through. And I think the Kylie one really captured that amazingly.
And I was taught, as you see in the film, it's predominantly his partners who tell the most revealing stuff. And I knew that I had to get out of them, including, tough nuts like Helena Christensen, who has spent, 20 years or so just sort of keeping a wall up about Michael. They knew I had to break through almost like a therapist and get their feelings out. And invariably they'd break down and cry, and they'd be far more relaxed about that because there's not a camera saying, oh, look, Kylie's crying or whatever.
Yeah, you were saying that when Kylie saw the first edits of the trailer, that she was sort of like, you've captured this perfectly and this is like an honest account.
Yeah, especially her. I mean, to be honest, I think she's only seen her section. Right? Yeah, right. But when her section came up, or when I ran, it's like 20 minutes. Her section I sent to her, and she basically sort of got quite emotional and said, you know, my sort of trust in you has been verified, because she did just hand me all this stuff, which in the wrong hands could have.
It's a really wild ride for everyone involved in the film to, you know, be a part of telling those stories again. There's so much like pain behind it all.
Some of them were incredibly hard. Like Michelle Bennett, the second major partner. You know, she's. I did about 3 interviews, and we're close friends. But she just, you know,
walls up.
Had the walls up. Yeah.
Taylor, what was it like editing a film like this? I mean, this is a pretty unique situation.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to jump in as well with the kind of conversation about not having the talking heads, because often that could be a challenge, because someone will say something so obscure and you're like, okay, we can't cut to a talking head, so how are we going to actually show that on screen? And so often it was us having to be quite experimental with our decisions. Overall, I mean, I just found the whole experience to be very educational, because I was not around in the era of INXS or Michael. So it was such an education, and I think it was also helpful because I didn't have sort of the background that maybe Richard would have had. So in a lot of cases, I could be quite objective and say, oh, you know, that's not so clear where we do that. And
Taylor became the voice of her generation, because we had, you know, there was 3 editors, me, Taylor and Lynn Marie Milburn, our other director at Ghost, and where me and Lynn were both of the generation that did the videos, and so we'd run things by Taylor as like, so what would your generation think of this, you know?
Yeah.
It was very handy actually to have that completely objective viewpoint of someone 20 or 30 years younger, and because we did want it to
play to all sorts of audiences.
To younger audiences, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been received really well that way as well. I mean, I've heard lots of testimonials from around the world of everyone from, you know, like teenagers through to much older people that were really connected with the band and with Michael.
I get really thrilled when the younger generation says, I didn't know any of this, that's amazing, you know, rather than just, I mean, the fans are obviously always going to come, but when it actually speaks to people, or even older generation who had just never weren't INXS fans, just when it speaks to people, I would have really, and part of me would have liked to make a story about an unknown rock star, you know, and just, you know, and follow this person that no one knew and say, this is a cautionary tale.
Like the Rodriguez story.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
It's always open for that. So there's a really beautiful line early in the film from Ananda, I think, that she says, and this kind of encapsulates Michael's like essence in a lot of ways. Something along the lines of, there's no aphrodisiac like being listened to sincerely.
Yes.
Did you find that resonate with people throughout the time you spent with the band and with Michael?
Yes.
Shooting videos and holidaying in France and all sorts of stuff?
Yes, well, Nanda put it beautifully. I mean, Nanda is actually, you know, grew up to be a novelist, so she had this great turn of phrase. And other people would put it like, you know, when Michael would speak to you, nothing, you know, he was really listening.
You were the only one in the room.
Yeah, the only one in the room. When you'd speak to Michael, the other way around, you really felt he was absolutely listening, and there was no one else in the room, and that would come up time and time again, but Ananda put it perfectly in that line. But it was definitely part of his appeal. It was part of the, you know, the thing that won me over initially when I first met him. As I think there was 3 of us, sort of young post-punks from Melbourne, arriving in a Queensland motel and sort of meeting these sort of 5, 6 Sydney sort of beach bums really, and where it couldn't have been further apart sort of culturally or subculturally, and yet, you know, within a few hours we're all sort of acting like we're best of friends, and you know, and all us sort of pale dyed hair punks, we're all sort of snorkeling off the Barrier Reef together with these Sydney mullet haired beach bums. And it was kind of remarkable. And it wasn't, I mean, they're all of INXS are nice guys, but Michael really did have that thing of like, I'm really interested in you and what you do and everything, and that just kept going on over the years. And you know, I mean, it was I think I did the timeline the other day, and basically from that moment, that shoot in Mackay in Queensland, to about 3 weeks later, he was playing in Nice, right next, as my first feature film was playing in the Cannes Film Festival. And we met up and partied and everything, but we had a meeting with an Australian film producer, Joan Long, her name was, who made The Picture Show Man. And I was pitching some really over-the-top political thriller that was going to change the world. And Michael was there, and it wasn't going so well. I just swapped the story and we got another film, and Michael's there. So that was literally 3 weeks after meeting him. I was offering him the lead in my next feature film. So it was quite, I always thought it was a year or two apart, and you know.
But actually quite close.
It was actually really, yeah. So I'd obviously seen him on camera, seen him do his impersonations, because he was great at impersonating people. Related to that, I reckon he'd be a good actor. And then next thing you know, I'm offering to lead him in a feature film without any casting or anything. So it was, yeah, he did have this power to really sort of make you trust him, because he was really interested in, he wasn't just sort of like checking out the girls in the room as you were blathering on, as I tend to, as you're noticing right now. But he was literally going, you know, hanging on every
really
word, and it was addictive, as Ananda says.
Technically, the film is kind of unique in this space as well, because you're showing all archival feature, you know, footage in a 4K space, which people aren't really used to seeing these days, but it's becoming more and more prevalent, which is the version you've all seen tonight. What was that process like? I mean, you've got huge amounts of collection, capture, digitization, and kind of some restoration as well to pull that together. Maybe you can talk about that a bit, Taylor.
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, I think we kind of dealt with every type of format. I mean, there were quite a few formats would come in, and I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but I'd be like, I know what that is. Of course I can digitize that, and just go home and Google, like, what is a digibeta tape or something like that. So we had, like... Umatic tape, yeah. So we had so many different formats, and I guess we just had a really good sort of organisational system at our end.
And Ghost has collected all the old machines. We buy them on eBay, so we have all the old machines that we can digitise and things. And,
so we could digitise all the pneumatic tapes in-house.
The home video format. So there's VHS-C in there, there's Video 8. Then there was Mini DV, which was a little later, it came in the year Michael died, I think. So his daughter... Tiger gave us some footage that was mini DV, and there was a hell of a lot. I was just saying, from the concept of doing an archival film, there's two schools of thought that you actually show the archival in its original format, where you actually see black left and right. But we made a conscious decision very early on that it was a 239 film in 4K, and we wanted, even though it was incredibly low resolution, some of this archive, we wanted it to fill the screen and immerse you in this world. And that meant that, you know, some of the images you see up there are a VHS-C, literally, you know, 300 lines of resolution that's been blown up to 4K.
Yeah.
And I think directors don't often do that. They tend to be purists, and so you've got to see that's got to be in the square PAL format, and because that's how the original artist, even though it's Michael may not have known what he was doing when he was waggling the camera.
How could he?
That's So it was that, it goes back to that thing I said before, that we did want you to take you back in time and immerse you in this sort of sound and visual experience, even if the footage is very, very blurry. And that had its problems too down the track with Marcus, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was because sometimes you're kind of juxtaposing 4K footage up against like the US festival footage, which is like PAL kind of resolution. And so I think sometimes you've got to make some creative choices to compensate for that. I think that's where, I mean, the split screens were Richard's idea, more of a creative choice, but I think it also aided in having two kind of low-res things side by side rather than having to like blow up the image and then the people just be absolutely like little square figures.
There was a combination of practicality in that decision, as well as my love of the film Woodstock, and so it was my homage to Woodstock, which did all that.
Like your Australian-made.
Australian-made, yes. There was lots of filming the toilets, like that came from Woodstock. That's a good point. I've forgotten that.
Some of the sound recordings that are used in the film are, I mean, I've certainly never heard INXS in that way before of that quality. There were new mixes done, there were new digitizations from 2-inch tape. That must have been really exciting as a filmmaker and editor to pull, that kind of quality audio and a new experience for audiences. And, you were saying there's Dolby Atmos mix, surround mix, and all that sort of stuff involved.
That's what I did actually approach the band and say, do you realise that, people have only ever heard your music in left-right stereo, maybe in old Dolby stereo, like Australian made, which is not really discrete stereo. It's not 5.1 at all. So if we can get your live tapes, and invariably, I used to remember when they recorded those multi-track recordings, they would have mics out in the audience. So if we can get your 24 tracks, or usually they were 48 tracks, they had two 24-track machines sunk together. If we can get them and remix them for 5.1 or Dolby Atmos, your music, your live music will be heard like it's never been heard before. And, so they're going, geez, that's a good idea, and let's do that. And then it all turned pear-shaped, and the next thing you know, they're releasing the Wembley concert in Dolby Atmos. Yeah. But it's like they'd never actually heard of Dolby Atmos before. I mentioned that to them. But to actually hear those recordings and say, put the audience mics in the surround speakers and put Michael's mic in the centre and the guitars left and right, you forget that no, you can't do that on a CD or record. You can only do it on the film. And when we first sort of took it to sound firm and mixed it, it was amazing to sort of go, you're actually really like in the centre. And that's one of my regrets, is that the film couldn't be longer, and so you could have more music and go further into the Wembley stuff and everything. But, there was this need to keep cutting it shorter and shorter, unfortunately.
And the Max Q recordings weren't Atmos, but they were 24-track, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And they were like an absolutely amazing discovery, because I think like 2 weeks out from our mix, we were maybe using like really bad rips off CDs. And then we actually found that the NFSA had the multi-tracks. And I think, so thank you guys, because I think very last minute, you digitized them all for us, and I think we got them sent directly to the mix and all added in, and they sound fantastic. So thank you.
Yeah, shout out to Cameron Rees, who I think might be in the audience, who works heavily on all of that content. Thanks, Cam.
And it was quite complicated getting the permissions, which quite rightly you need. All these recordings have owners, and you need the permissions. But in that case, because Michael paid for those recordings himself, those permissions fell on his daughter, and we're very lucky to have his daughter and Ollie Olsen both agree so that we could access those recordings. But we also, in those recordings, we found mixes that never been heard before. And in fact, the song on the end credits is a kind of a cabaret version or cabaret mix of a song off the Max Q album, which to my ears sounds infinitely better than what was actually on the CD. It's just you can hear Michael's voice so loud and clear, and I actually did play it to Ollie Olsen and he said, sounds like shit. All you can hear is Michael's voice.
That might be a personal gripe.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Look, we're not going to go on all night. I'd love to throw to some questions from the audience if you have some. Pop your hand up and we'll come to you with a microphone.
Hi, I just wanted to ask in relation to the What You Need video, which was so innovative and creative at the time. How did you sell that to the band? Because it was so different and still today is excellent. How did you kind of sell that to them?
It's a very funny story, actually. I mean, that was kind of early in our work with the band, so they sort of, it's not that the band kind of, like they're very lovely guys and they sort of just said, yeah, whatever from the start. But it's the management with the problem because, you know, management, record companies and everything. Burn For You was just, you know, it was fairly low budget. That was the very first video. What You Need was the second video we did. So Burn For You had done all right and everyone seemed happy with it. But we sort of, we had this idea and which was, we'd seen collages in Face magazine, which was a photograph lined up with a black and white Xerox of the same photograph and torn down the middle, and so half the sides Xerox. And me and Lynn Marie, who actually directed that video, said, you know, we could make that move, you know, a lot of work, but we could make that technique move. And so we went, next meeting we had with the band, we sort of pitched them and they sort of glazed over. And then the band manager sort of perks up and says, you know, I always imagined a whole lot of models walking in one door and across in front of the band are playing and there's a big INXS on the back and the models, leggy models in short skirts walking across in front of the band. And I'm going, I don't usually argue with those kind of comments. I just go, okay. And then, you know, but can we do our technique on top of all that? You go, yeah, do your technique. We don't understand what you're talking about, but let's do it. So we get to the shoot. Of course, we don't book no models. We don't even do the INXS in the background. We just got them there. We're shooting the whole thing on a still camera with a motor drive instead of a 35mm camera. And I was sitting next to the assistant manager in the studio. The manager's not there. And he takes a phone call and I hear sort of on the speakerphone, and say, has he got the models? No. Has he got the big INXS in the background? He says, no. He says, what has he got? He hasn't even got a film camera. It's like, Jesus Christ, we're rooted, I think was. But then I also say, I need, you know, What You Need took 3 months to animate and edit, and I think Jill Bilcock was editing it. But the animation took a hell of a long time, and so that was one of my demands. I need 3 months, and then, you know, and then they keep demanding, can we see half of it? Can we see, you know, we want to put it on NTV. But then, you know, when it's finally finished, they just, you know, they're not the sharpest knives in the drawer. They just watch it and they go, fuck. And I remember the fuck. It's like, and very similar to our first video, which is how I got the work with INXS, which was the Hunters and Collectors talking to a stranger. Is like, I remember taking it into Mushroom Records and all the people were just there going, and it's over, it goes for 7 minutes and they just go, fuck, what was that?
How do we market this? Yeah.
I got to say, all those techniques, including Hunters and What You Need and Need It Tonight, were all things I actually saw and learnt at the Melbourne Film Co-op in the 1970s. I was a sort of a 12-year-old sort of film co-op groupie who I'd just hang around with all these weird experimental filmmakers like the Cantrills. And I'll just watch these sort of sometimes incredibly boring films with all these weird in-camera techniques and strange, you know, they might have bursts of static on the soundtrack and they'd go for 3 hours. And I'd be sitting there sort of falling asleep and waking up and the flowers are pulsating or whatever. And I actually took all those techniques, a lot of it's in camera, into the world of music videos and said, well, you know, they're not going to be 3 hours, and the soundtrack's going to be really attractive as a pop song. But let's use all that stuff that I saw in the Melbourne Film Cop in my music videos, and that's sort of
Really cut some new ground in the world of music video in Australia at that time.
And people hadn't actually experienced that sort of, really that grungy, you know, it's all filmed with a Bolex doing single framing and things like that. You know, stuff that I'd actually seen and, you know, come out of the Canadian Film Board and everything like that. And Norman McLaren was obviously a huge influence on our work.
I'm sorry, just another quick one. I saw Escape from New York a few months ago and couldn't help but notice the similarities to the Listen Like Thieves video.
Yes, that was an influence on our work as well. Yes, that was a direct. When we finished, we did what was it? Listen Like Thieves. That video, we shot that the day after we finished shooting Dogs in Space. So all the cast from Dogs in Space are in it, the same cameras, I think, and basically we were shooting Dogs in Space. INXS had an enforced 8-week holiday because Michael was in the film, and in the last week I kept getting these calls, you know, they need things are, maybe it was What You Need, but you know, everything's shooting up in America, the songs are charging up the charts, so we need another video pronto, and Michael's there, and so I just picked the biggest budget concept I could think of, which was Escape from New York, and said, okay, we've got all the cranes and the cameras, and let's do a big, you know, Hollywood movie style of video, and we did it, and it was very much a reference to Escape from New York. Much like, you know, the Mediate video was a reference to D.A. Pennebaker's work, you know.
Do we have another question?
There was no reference to Dogs in Space in the movie, although there was a narrative about Michael wanting to be seen as an artist sort of more broadly. Yes. So I was just wondering, that would have been maybe a good way to pitch him as not just a musician but also an actor. Was there a reason for that?
I think it was, I mean, we used to have it, and it's one of the longest DVD extras on the DVD, and but it was in the film, and it wasn't just Dogs in Space, it was his whole love of acting and growing up on film sets in Hong Kong and going into Dogs in Space, and then Frankenstein Unbound, the Roger Corman film, and it basically, most of our investors and producers said, well, the problem with it, it's illuminating to Michael's character, but it stops the narrative flow. It actually stops the story because it takes place, you know, from childhood right through, and the film does have this sort of moving forward narrative flow as he's moving on to the next stage of his life. And we ended up, you know, that this sort of decision was to take it out, even though I felt it was quite important. And it was one of those sort of editing decisions. We just didn't have the time in the film, you know. It would have been a 115, 120-minute film. And we were finding the film was testing people's patience, especially, you know, not the fans, obviously, who could watch 3 hours, but it was testing your patience when it had huge gaps that didn't move the film story-wise further. It was more character analysis. So it did become a DVD extra, unfortunately. There was lots of discussion about it.
We have probably time for one more if there is another, just here in the blue.
I was just wondering, since we've heard about Michael's life, will there be, do you think we will hear a perspective from Tiger Lily, like what was he like growing up, having Michael as a dad and all of that, since we got Michael's perspective?
I think Tiger may one day, but don't forget Tiger was only 2 years old, or less than 2 years old when he passed away. So I think she's a very private person, and she's very private about what was going on when she was very young, And I think there's still obviously an element of trauma in there. Her sister passed away, her mother, and there's all that history between Michael and Bob, and that which kept going, I'd say, into her adult life. And so I don't think as she she was very appreciative to see the film and taught her a lot of things she didn't know. And but I think it actually saved her, having that journey and going around and meeting all the people that knew him that she possibly would at some stage. So I think she's happy to sort of just let things lie at the moment. And last I heard she was living in Perth with her partner. But yeah, so I don't think she really feels there's much more for her to say. She donated some footage for the film, which was nice. Some of her mother and Michael's footage that she found in her possession.
We might end it there. Thank you guys so much for joining us and sharing the film. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for getting me here.
This was the last in our sound-breaking music documentary series for summer, but we do have a really exciting autumn program out now and winter being developed at the moment as well, so please check in with that. Thank you again, guys, and have a great night, everyone. Thank you for listening to an audio recording from the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia. You're listening to an audio recording from the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the